But right now, we're pleased to have Bret Easton Ellis join us on our set. He's written his first nonfiction book. Here's the cover. It's called White. Mr. Ellis, what is this book about?
It's about 247 pages long. That's a good question. I think it's a collection of what I've been going through in the past 5 or 6 years. It's about my relationship with social media. It's about being a man of a certain age who was living for a very long time in an analog era and finding himself in the digital era and the adjustments I had to make. It's a bit of a memoir about writing American Psycho and what that meant to me, and the controversies that book caused, and how that character of Patrick Bateman has haunted me. It looks like it's like an 8-part essay in many ways, and I wanted it to have the quality of fiction. I wanted it to have a beginning, a middle, end. I wanted it to flow. But it essentially is, I guess it's part memoir, part cultural criticism, and as you said, it is the first nonfiction that I've published.
How did American Psycho haunt you?
Well, the popularity of it certainly haunted me, and the notion that Patrick Bateman will be the most famous character I will ever create. When I didn't expect that to happen at all. I thought American Psycho was in many ways an experimental novel with all of these experimental flourishes, but it turned out to be the most popular novel I've written, and that character, Patrick Bateman, the serial killer, Wall Street serial killer, certainly became, and in part due to the movie with Christian Bale playing Bateman, just became this iconic character that proved to me as a writer, you have no control over what you write or what happens to your books when they go out into the world. They take on a life of their own. Patrick Bateman took off on a life of his own when he went out into the world. And I've wrestled with that at times. Unlike any of my other characters, I think about him a lot, and I do write a section of this book about that.
Yes, and one of the things that you address in White is it wasn't your intention to make Patrick Bateman what he was, and was it real?
This is correct. I talk about writing American Psycho with the notion of, is it all in his head? Is he making up all of these murders, all of this carnage, or is it really happening? And for some reason, that was extremely interesting as a writer, not knowing and writing it anyway. Sometimes I thought it was happening. Sometimes I thought maybe he's crazy, maybe he's drunk. But the answer to that mystery was never as interesting to me as the mystery itself.
Why White?
Well, my favorite essayist is Joan Didion, and my favorite book of essays is The White Album, which he published in 1979. Maybe even my favorite essay is the title essay in that collection. So when I was putting this book together, the working title, I wanted it to have something to do with referencing the White Album. And me and my editor came up with a kind of jokey title called White Privileged Male, because let's face it, this is a book about the experiences of a white privileged male. No getting around that, you can't hide that. And we thought it was accurate and kind of funny. And yet, the more that the book began to take shape, it just was too jokey. So we got rid of the privileged male, and we decided to stay with white as something blank, neutral, especially in this era where everyone is so hysterical over everything. To us, it was a title about neutrality and calmness, a call to calmness in a way. And you know, if it is a provocative title and it pushes any buttons, well, then it's kind of proved the point in the book, you know, that everything is about this or this or this. And then I guess my job was done.
What's the empire you refer to constantly throughout the book?
The empire is something that Gore Vidal coined about America post-World War II. When America was at its most powerful and prosperous, he said that America had, in fact, become an empire. and all empires ultimately crumble. And I was noticing something crumbling in the early oddies, in the early 2000s, where it seemed that the empire wasn't able to keep up its mask of propriety, because the empire was all about masks and propriety and like boomer self-assurance, and it was how you presented yourself that mattered so much more than transparency. And then I noticed that there was this thing happening that I coined post-empire, where people seemed to be breaking away from that, and you saw it a lot in hip-hop, you saw it in rap, certainly saw it flourish during Obama's presidency, this kind of refusal to wear the mask. And you saw celebrities doing it everywhere, most famously with Charlie Sheen's meltdown, but it could have been anything from John Mayer giving a very sexually charged interview to Playboy magazine that no star of the past would have ever thought of doing. And it was about pushing against this sense of this fake propriety. And then, of course, it couldn't last. Corporate culture came in, collided with social media, and snapped that all up. So now there's empire, post-empire, and then corporate culture.
From White, there was once what now seems a magical moment where you could voice your opinions, make them public, and commence a genuine discussion, but the culture now seems so fearful of discourse that any such thing instead provokes an attack.
I think what we're talking about there is a new kind of Puritanism. I don't think it's about sexism or racism or homophobia. I think we're talking about a blanket Puritanism that has announced itself and is turning everyone into a child with the same rules and regulations that we have in elementary school. Everyone needs to be clean and polite, and but we're going beyond that. I mean, we're getting to places right now where you just can't say things that we used to be able to say. Have an opinion that doesn't belong to groupthink is suddenly, gets you canceled. And I wonder, and I think maybe I feel it more than maybe others do, because I'm a public person, I'm a writer, I have a podcast, I want to be able to speak freely, and I also had a problem with American Psycho. When it was first published, that book in itself was censored at one point. So maybe that makes me more sensitive to all of this. But I am worried about the speech police, and that you have to regulate what you say to such a degree that a lot of people just don't say anything.
You've got a pretty active Twitter account.
You know what? To a degree. It used to be more active before it became this place only for virtue signaling, and I don't know. I mean, it did become a kind of famous account in 2012, 2013, 2014. But I noticed this shift in Twitter. It wasn't fun anymore. The early years were really fun. You could say outrageous things, you could make crazy jokes, and people would gasp and kind of go crazy. But you wouldn't get thrown off Twitter. You wouldn't get canceled off Twitter. You wouldn't have a series canceled because of Twitter, or get fired off, a big budget movie because of some tweets from like 6 or 7 years ago. So it's become, Twitter has become a bit of a trap now, and it wasn't when it first started out.
What do you think of the president's tweets?
Well, it's certainly an amazing way to communicate with the people, and I think despite what one might think of him, he uses that pretty well. And I think he also feels that he has to, because he feels that the mainstream media is fake news, and that this is his way of getting his truth out there.
Again, from White, Bret Easton Ellis writes that the last thing Twitter seemed good for was to be sensitive about anything, and I was often at odds with the notion that anyone could really deeply care about a tweet in the first place. You tweeted, people screamed, people laughed, you shrugged, everyone moved on. That's how I initially saw Twitter, but after a while I realized that Twitter actually encouraged anger and despair from the overly sincere, the virtue signaler, the dumbass. the literal-minded, the humorless.
Whoa, God, I really went after that, didn't I? Well, yeah, I agree with all of that. I wrote that all in. That sounds pretty good. That sounds like the correct summation of where it ended up. I don't know. It seemed like such an innocent toy in the beginning that really turned into this, angry animal that you had to you have to put down. I don't know.
So have you ever,
I really don't use it that much anymore. I use it to promote stuff, certainly to promote books. I mean, it's great to let people know where you're at, where your event is, or when your pub date is, or posting an interview. But in terms of using it to be creative, and to have some fun, I don't do it. It's almost not worth the risk.
this is your first book in what, 7, 8, 10 years?
Yeah, about 9 or 10 years.
And?
The tour hasn't even begun. This is my first thought.
Are you looking forward to it?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. A lot has changed since 2010. A lot of ways have changed, maybe not for the better. I think it'll be interesting to see how freely one can talk in 2019 about things compared to 9 years ago. That's going to be something that's interesting, I think.
Let's hear from our callers. The numbers are up on the screen in case you want to call in and talk with Bret Easton Ellis as well. Iris, South Lyon, Michigan, please go ahead.
Well, hi, everybody. Oh, I love his work, and Christian Bale was so fantastic. Listen, I got to tell you something. I think it's amazing how people are sitting there like pounced lions waiting for these Twitter messages from the president, that there's thousands of people that seem to pick it up before he even finishes it. You know, the dislikes, the likes, and how many take it forward. But what I find interesting, I'm white, I think, but I have freckles. I don't know the difference, but I know when I give a pint of blood, whoever needs it isn't going to ask the color of the skin of the person who gave it. So it's all very weird, but yeah, you become very defensive being white. It's almost, you have to excuse yourself. I'm sorry.
All right, that's Iris in Michigan. Do you have to have white people become defensive about being white? Do you agree with that statement she made?
Well, I do agree with it because white people I know joke about it all the time. I don't think it's anything that has to do with oppression, white oppression or whatever. But it's funny that is openly talked about and jokes are made about it among people I know. Not all the time, but certainly it's a kind of there's a sense of amusement about that. But it is true. I mean, it is disappearing. It is dissipating. And I think the cover of White itself, Chip Kidd designed the cover, who's designed all my covers. This notion of white floating up into nothingness, or at least, disappearing into like the sky, is kind of an accurate visual metaphor for where we are. I mean, white men are dying out in a way, and we are becoming a much more diverse world. So I don't feel any defensiveness about being white, and I can make plenty of jokes about my whiteness in terms of certain cultural things that you put a check mark to that belong to being white. There are jokes about it all over social media. I can't get too worked up about that.
What's President Trump's connection to American Psycho?
Well, when I was writing American Psycho in the late 80s, Trump was quite the man about town. And I think every other New York Post cover, he was on it. And everyone was always asking him about advice. He was being interviewed all the time. And a lot of the guys who worked on Wall Street, who I initially did my research with in order to create Patrick Bateman and that Wall Street world, really liked him. He was an aspirational figure. The Art of the Deal had been a big bestseller. And there was a certain group of young Wall Street guys who looked up to him and wanted to be him. It seemed a little annoying to me. I mean, I thought I saw Trump as, I'm not going to say a buffoon in a way, but certainly there was this kind of slobby nouveau riche attitude about him that I thought was not that cool. And I was very surprised that so many people responded to him. And so, in the novel, Patrick Bateman looks at Trump as if he's the father he never had. He's always quoting him. He's always going to the restaurants Trump recommends the New York Post. He always thinks he sees Trump. He wants to get invited to a party that Ivana Trump is having, and on and on. And finally, near the end of the book, he finds himself walking up to 5th Avenue, 57th Street, and just standing in front of Trump Tower, gazing at it in the late afternoon sun, completely obsessed with Donald Trump. Now, this was published in 1991. I just thought it was funny. I thought it was funny to have 35 or 40 Trump jokes in American Psycho. And of course, no one had any idea that we would be where we are now with him in the White House. But yeah, that is Donald Trump's association with American Psycho.
Carl's calling in from Providence, Rhode Island. Carl, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Ellis there was talking about Donald Trump, with the money. Actually, Donald Trump really didn't do that well in business. It was his father. His father was the one. Yes. My Germanic older brother is the one who built that company. Okay? He then got the index files from his father and went from there, and he almost went broke. I mean, some people think he's teetering right now. Okay? And, Oh, yeah.
So, Carl, why did you call in? What was your original question that you wanted to ask Bret Easton Ellis?
Yeah, I have not read the gentleman's book yet, but he mentioned about White, and then I hear him talking. That's a good question about being defensive about White, being white. That's an absolute disgrace. You're a Nordic white gentleman, Mr. Slen. I believe Mr. Ellis is kind of, Scots-Irish. I could be wrong. But,
right.
You take a look at our culture. We have built things. That's all what I've got to say.
All right, Carl, Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you for calling in. Let's hear from Cliff, who is in San Angelo, Texas. And Cliff, you're on Book TV with author Bret Easton Ellis. His new book is called White.
Hello, Bret. Congratulations on your book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to. Listen, I just wanted to comment. I'm an old white guy, and I hear the liberal left constantly criticize either Trump or whoever their so-called political enemies are. The ultimate, or let's say last gap criticism is, well, you're a racist. You're a racist. You're a racist. And the same ones openly, these commentators and they say, well, this old white guy, they use that expression. Do you think that's racist?
Thank you, sir. Bret Easton Ellis.
Well, sure. I mean, if the definition of racist is what the gentleman is saying, it can be applied, of course, both ways. Now, culturally, people don't like that, and they don't want to admit that could be racist, that there is no such thing as, that it really all comes from the Caucasian perspective. But sure, I guess you could say that. I mean, discriminating anybody on whatever color their skin is racism.
Have you been accused of being a misogynist or a racist because of your work, your tweets, your commentary?
Oh, definitely. A lot. And it's interesting because I guess it comes from being interested in aesthetics over ideology, which I talk a lot about in the book. I'm very interested in the aesthetics of things, the style of things. I'm not so interested in the message of things. And I talk a lot about film on my podcast. And I talk a lot about gay cinema. I talk a lot about black cinema. I talk a lot about feminist cinema, female directors, and movies about, the women's movement and women's victimization. And often those movies to me are messagey movies. They don't really hit my sweet spot in terms of like genre, which I really like. And I prefer a kind of crazy, stylistic, experimental film rather than a dogged drama about victimization and about, ideology. And when you start criticizing those kinds of movies, you do get tagged those things. And I think we're just in this moment now where if you don't follow certain things and agree with certain things, then you are very, very casually tagged those things. Certainly, misogyny has followed me since the publication of American Psycho, where it was misread. I mean, I don't think a depiction of misogyny is an act of misogyny, and yet that fell on deaf ears in 1990 when that book was being berated by feminists. So yeah, I have had that tagged. I think racism now is the big taboo, and yet I don't know if it has that power anymore because everybody is being called racist left and right for very small or no offenses. I mean, it's kind of like if you don't like Black Panther, you're racist. Or Katy Perry put out a racist tweet, or Bette Midler said something that was. It's a continuum. It's part of the overreactive, kind of hysterical culture that we are kind of stuck in right now, and I don't know what the end game is.
Back to White. Anxiety and neediness became the defining aspect of Generation Wuss. And when the world didn't offer any financial cushion, then you had to rely on social media presence, maintaining it, keeping the brand in play, striving to be liked, an actor, no negativity allowed. We're only asking to be admired in the display culture we were raised in. There's a lot to unpack in that paragraph.
Well, it's something that I noticed. I mean, I know a lot of millennials.
Is that Generation Wuss?
Yeah, that's okay. Generation Wuss. And I guess it's a term I coined on my Twitter feed many years ago because I was living with a millennial. And I was kind of alarmed at what triggered him and what upset him and what he was interested in. And it just seemed weak. And so this term Generation Wuss came into play, and I used to notice things of the culture as a Generation Wuss strikes again, or they're offended by something, whatever. It was supposed to be playful, but it kind of caught on, and I wrote a piece about them that's reprinted here about what it's like to live with a member of Generation Wuss. But all of those things that you read that make up one of them, and again, I'm not saying this about every member of the generation, I found to be true, and I still find to be true, and I still find it even with the generation moving up behind Generation Wuss is also triggered by so many things that just don't affect me or don't affect members of, say, my generation. It's amusing.
Chris, Huntsville, Alabama. Go ahead with your question or comment for Bret Easton Ellis. Anna, Federal Way, Virginia. You are on the air. Anna, what do you want to say?
Hello. My call is in reference to one of the past callers who was asking whether it was racist being called an old white man. And when he introduced himself, he said that he was an old white guy. So why would he consider it racist if somebody would call him an old white man?
Any comment for Anna?
Well, I mean, I understand the frustration and with the making fun of the old white guy situation. I don't know how seriously we should take it. I think you should take it kind of in a different spirit and perhaps shrug it off. It's kind of a joke, and yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't let it unmoor you.
When did people start identifying so relentlessly with victims, you ask? And when did the victim's worldview become the lens through which we began to look at everything? What's your answer?
Well, certainly identity politics played a big role in the creation of that. When everyone started to feel put upon and victimized because of their identity, that certainly was a moment that encouraged exactly that. And that is too bad, because it becomes a kind of endless cycle of self-victimization, constantly referring to yourself as a victim because of your sex or your ethnicity or whatever your place is in society. Doesn't seem to me to be progressive at all.
When does a book tour start, and where are you going?
Book tour starts April 16th. It takes me for a few dates across America, and then I'm going to go to the UK, France, Holland, and then it will the next part of the tour will resume in September.
White is the name of the book. Bret Easton Ellis is the author, and he's been our guest on Book TV.